Are you dreaming of setting up your own orchard on your homestead, but are wondering if you should plan a traditional or permaculture orchard? Or better yet, you wonder if a tree guild is right for you? Perfect. Today, you and I are going to talk about the difference between a traditional or permaculture orchard, the benefits of both on your homestead, and answer that burning question: which one's right for your homestead? Let's get growing. Hello, and welcome to the Pray Just Plant podcast, the show that talks about growing a garden, a homestead, a healthy family, and most importantly, growing closer to God. I'm your host, Crystal Media, owner of the Red Ridge Farm Homestead, where our mission is to help women of faith find the courage to grow healthy food for their family while building a closer relationship with our Lord and Savior. That's you. Don't let the world hold you back. Pray Just Plant. Welcome to the Pray Just Plant podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Media, and today in season 2, episode 8, we are going to talk about orchards, or essentially putting fruit trees on your homestead. Now, before we get really deep into what the difference is and answer that burning question of which one's right for you, you may be surprised by this answer. So you'll have to maybe wait till the end, but you're definitely going to be surprised. Let's first get some definitions out of the way. So what is the definition for permaculture? Bill Mollison, the founder of the term permaculture in 1978, says that the definition of permaculture is the conscious design and maintenance of agriculture productive systems which have the diversity, stability, and resilience of natural ecosystems. It is a harmonious integration of the landscapes with people providing their food, energy, shelter, and other materials and non-materials needs in a sustainable way. In short, really, permaculture is a way that man is using the systems God put in place in the beginning to satisfy all the needs for food, energy, and shelter. God designed this world to function, and when men step in and try to change the way things work, we get less production, we get less food, and we become dependent on things that aren't in God's nature. We become dependent on pesticides and chemical fertilizers. God has already invented the things we need to function in this world. He said that he would cover it in Genesis. So that's the definition of permaculture, and I'm going to get into defining a permaculture orchard in a minute. But first, let's talk a little bit how traditional orchard may be a little different than even this view of just the word permaculture. So a traditional orchard, if you were to look it up in the dictionary, it says that a traditional orchard is a orchard that is planted for a single variety of fruit. They are usually a monoculture of large, mature fruit trees spread for ease of heavy equipment and are planted at usually a high density of 150 trees per acre. That is a lot of trees. Yes, that is just a lot of trees. And if I could ever get my soil to ever even produce 10 trees in that kind of situation, it would be a miracle. I would be set for life. But what this does, this monoculture, this dependency on the ease of having heavy equipment, the high density of planting these trees really close together, these bring in a lot of problems because they're not like nature. They're not in a system that permaculture is trying to tell us about. Permaculture, like I said, it's where we are trying to copy nature. And nature very rarely has monocultures. Yes, we do have situations where trees grow very closely together in very dense situations, but we don't have added pressure of those trees not being able to be a tree. Now, what I mean by that is when we go into a forest, you go on a nice hike with your family, you walk through and walk over layers and layers upon debris from those trees. Every year they shed something. Every year they give up their leaves if you're going through a deciduous forest. Every year, even in a conifer forest, pine needles fall to the ground. There's also a layer of shrubs. There's other plants growing. It's never going to be that complete monoculture, and it's never going to be a clean, swept area like an orchard is going to be. One of the big things about an orchard is its high maintenance because they're cleaning up. They can't leave the leaves on the ground because then they may attract different pests. They can't leave the fruit to rot on the ground because that might attract different pests. So with all these close quarters and no other varieties of plants to help them function, they're usually very dependent on pesticide and the orchardist. Now, an orchardist is you. It's the person who manages or maintains an orchard. And a traditional orchard also needs lots of water. That's why if you were to travel to Oregon or Washington and go visit all these traditional orchards, you're going to find that they're next to large lakes and reservoirs. So you can already see with that definition of permaculture how a traditional orchard just doesn't function the way it functions at the ease of humans instead of at the ease and the control of what happens in nature. So that brings us to what a permaculture orchard is. So permaculture orchard is unlike a traditional orchard because it has multiple layers of vegetation. And I'm going to explain the different layers in a moment. It's not solely grown, and all these different layers and all these different plants are not solely grown to produce one crop. All of these other plants and trees even that are brought into this orchard, some are going to be there to produce fruit, but some are going to be there to improve the soil, and some are going to be there just to attract beneficial pollinators, and some may be there to repel pests. That's just a very quick definition of a permaculture orchard. That's a quick difference. Is a traditional orchard is going to have a monoculture. It's going to be very meticulously maintained by humans, where a permaculture orchard is going to, yes, be cared for by the human. I'm not saying that we're going to plant it and forget it. I'm just saying that everything doesn't have to be so controlled. And in fact, we want to bring in assistance. We want to bring in help. So we want to bring in other plants that can help us accomplish some of the things that we would normally struggle with in a traditional orchard. So I'm going to get into, actually the kind of plants and a few ideas behind the permaculture orchard in just a moment. But now it is time for the tips and tricks segment of this episode, where I share with you a few bonus tips and tricks I use here at Red Ridge Farm. This week's tip is brought to you by the Build Your Soil Health Guide. This guide was designed to help you, the grower, become that expert that your garden is craving you to become that expert of your garden's soil. This week's tip is all about bringing pollinators into our growing journey. So it's very easy and very important, especially when you're thinking about adding an orchard or even growing in your garden, to be thinking about how you can bring in pollinators. Now, one way that I do that here on Red Ridge Farm Homestead is that when I'm planting my garden, I also include flowers. Yes, a garden is to feed your family. Yes, a garden is to put food on your table. But I think adding those flowers to your garden, yes, they bring in pollinators, but they also feed you. They feed your soul. When you're out there in the garden and you happen to see as your zinnias blooming, or you see the bees buzzing around your big, huge sunflowers, or you see the multicoloredness of the beautiful marigolds that you decided to plant with your tomatoes, all of those things can bring lightness to your soul. But they also can bring in different pollinators to help you grow that garden even more efficiently. Because pollination has to be done for us to get fruit. So when we bring in those pollinators, we're helping our garden and we're helping us grow even more. So my tip for you this week is to figure out somewhere, either in a pot by your gate or somewhere in your garden, that you can tuck just a few flowers. And if you were wanting to look for a few cut flowers that you can add, because cut flowers are great to bring indoors and get a really good multi-use out of them, I have a blog post that you can check out. I will include it in the description and in the show notes of this episode. So let's get back to a permaculture orchard. So let's recap really quickly. We talked about the definition of a permaculture. We talked about how a traditional orchard and a permaculture orchard are different. The simplest difference is their monoculture to polyculture. And that one tries to follow the convenience of man and the other one tries to follow the systems already made, already functioning, and already working well in nature. let's talk about a permaculture orchard a little bit more in definition. So if you were to look at a traditional orchard, you would see rows and rows of trees. You are going to see the same thing in a permaculture orchard. The only difference is those rows and rows of trees are going to be not the same kind of tree. In fact, there's a gentleman up in Canada that has grown and is still growing a permaculture orchard. And his main focus when he decided to design this, now this is just an idea that you can think about. When he chose to design this, he thought about it very meticulously. He didn't just sporadically put this orchard together. He still put a little bit of influence on it. One way that he felt that he could easily kind of keep track of things in his records and keep track of data on how things were going to go was that he made a certain plan. He made a certain style, and it's called the Sobkowski style. I sure hope I am saying that name correctly. But if you have ever watched the movie Permaculture Orchard or gone to YouTube and typed in Permaculture Orchard, he has a great YouTube channel about how he has brought this idea of a permaculture orchard to life. And one of the things he does and the style that he does is that he plants, yes, they're still in rows, just like a traditional orchard, but he plants them in a certain pattern. So the pattern is NAP. So he plants a nitrogen fixing tree, then he plants an apple variety, may not be all the same apple variety. Then he either plants a pear or a plum. He's really done a great job at still giving it that permaculture style, but it's still an orchard. And so another thing that he does is around, instead of having the ground completely clean like you would see in a traditional orchard, and also have wide spacing between trees, or certain spacing so that machinery can come in, he brings them even a little bit closer so that they actually intertwine just like in a forest. And then also on the ground, he lays down a deep mulch around each of the bases of the trees. And then he's got kind of pathways in between these mulchings where he raises grass and different things that he does for his orchard. But in this mulch area, it's not just trees. He goes even further into planting more of forest type planting. So I know when you were back in grade school, you always got that picture of the rainforest that had the different layers in it. You had the ground cover layer, you had the shrub layer, you had the lower canopy and the middle canopy and the higher canopy, and then you had the vines. All of that comes to play in a permaculture orchard. So when you're thinking of planting a permaculture orchard, you are going to have those different layers. So here is kind of some examples of what that would look like. So you have your big trees, and they're like, if you would go by the NAP style, you would have a nitrogen fixer, an apple, a pear, or a plum. And then in the next row, you would alternate just a little bit, and you would have, maybe you start with an apple, then your pear, and then your nitrogen fixer, so that the same trees aren't right next to each other. The same type of tree aren't right next to each other. Then you would have a deep mulch, and then in that mulch, you're going to have your understory plantings. Just like in a forest, you could either do more nitrogen fixers, you could do some fruit bushes or some flowers for pollinators, things like maybe like red currants or raspberries or honeyberries. And then you're going to go down to the herb layer. Now this herb layer is plants that are non-woody plants to help with biomass for mulch. They're going to help you in the future continue to mulch your trees, because the biggest thing the mulching is helping with is because fruit trees do not do well with grass around their roots. Fruit trees have very shallow root system. And so having grass growing around the base of your trees is they compete against each other for nutrients. Planting something like your herb layer is going to help bring in mulch. And you can do different things that can be cut annually and placed on for mulch. And mulch is also going to increase moisture, just like a forest is going to do. But you can also plant in this herb layer. You can do things that can either give you food or you give the trees food. So you could do comfrey. Comfrey is a great plant for bringing up deep minerals. You could do dill or fennel. that will be great for your table, but also distract against pests. You could do peppers and tomatoes or bush beans or other herbs. But then the next thing that comes in this layer, I'm giving you this vision of what a permaculture orchard looks like, but also what is in there. So you have the tree layer, you have the understory layer, you have the herb layer, and then you have the ground cover layer. This can be things like you could put in strawberries, you could put in creeping thyme. Then you also have the vines, the vine layer, where you want plants to grow up the trees and hang from the trees. And you could do simple things like annuals, like pole beans or squash or cucumbers, or you could do hops or climbing roses or kiwi. There's so many different options that you can do. And then the final layer of this permaculture orchard would be the root layer. You have the carrots, the potatoes, the ginger, the onions. And so you can see that not only is a permaculture orchard a polyculture, it is so much more than that. It's more than just different types of trees. It's trying to, like the definition of permaculture says, it's trying to take those ideas, those conscious design and maintenance ideas from the resilient and diverse and stable natural ecosystems, and finding some kind of harmonious integration with us as the steward, but also as really trying to bring and get everything in a very sustainable way. So permaculture orchard is really trying to just bring all of that together. So let's take a moment to talk about a fruit guild. How is a fruit guild different than an orchard or a permaculture orchard? I found a great article by the 10th Acre Farm. It's a great blog that I follow that really breaks down what a fruit tree guild is. The simplest definition, I believe, is it's kind of like a permaculture orchard, but intensified and brought into a smaller scale. A guild is usually focused around one tree, and then you try to bring in plants around that tree that boost that tree. And the same thing goes for a permaculture orchard, but you're just seeing it in a bigger scale. You're seeing that you are still trying to make that same kind of orchard like a traditional orchard. You're having multiple trees. You're having rows upon rows of trees. Where a guild is more of a central situation, almost like a mini ecosystem. So you're trying to bring in that ecosystem idea of a permaculture orchard, and you're trying to bring it almost to like the backyard situation. And you're also going to go a little more intense in the plants that you choose. It's going to help connect different parts of an ecosystem, but not be so much more of like a forest, like say a permaculture orchard is going to be. Because when you are focusing on building a guild, you are also focusing on that you are going to be wanting to stick with about 7 types of plants. Now, when you're talking about a permaculture orchard, we were talking about different layers in a forest. And you can choose in these different layers, different jobs that they would do. In a fruit tree guild, you are more focused on the tree being your focal point, and then the plants around it being there to support the tree, not necessarily support you, where a permaculture orchard is going to be a little bit of both. You could have plants like I talked about. You could put in roses, you could put in tomatoes, you could put in things that benefit you, and then you can also put in things that will deter wildlife. You could put in those things that are mulch that are going to benefit the tree. So permaculture orchard is kind of that mixture. So I would say that a traditional orchard would be on your far left, and a tree guild would be on your far right, and the permaculture orchard would be right in the middle, because the guild is bringing in ideas from that permaculture orchard, but it's bringing it in on a smaller scale. So like if I were to give you the list of the type of plants that you would want in a fruit tree guild, they could be some of the types of plants that you'd put in a permaculture orchard, but they're going to be more focused. They're going to be more as a function, as a multifunction for the benefit of the tree. For example, I'll give you the list of the 7 types of plants. You want a plant that will attract beneficial insects. You want a different plant to deter wildlife, and the next one to fertilize, and the next could be to mulch, and the next would to produce nectar to attract pollinators. The next two would be to repel pests, and one could be to suppress grass. So all of those things, you can see that list is to benefit the tree and not so much bring in more food. To me, I kind of think that the permaculture orchard is more of a food forest. It's that idea of bringing in the forest, but also planting things in the forest style that can give you and I food for our table. Now it is time for the Growing with God segment of this episode, where we talk about building that relationship with our Lord and Savior. And this week's verse is, there is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear. 1 John 4:18. Fear is a part of us. As mothers, having a child, even before they're born, you fear about what he's going to look like. You fear about how she's going to develop. Is she going to have her 10 toes? Is she going to have her 10 fingers? Is he going to be healthy? Is he going to be whole? Those are some fears that mothers have, but they don't deter us from having children. They're there. Those fears are there. But that love that we also feel for our unborn child, that love that we feel for our children as they grow up, there's still fear in every day of being a mother. And that can go even further into, not only are you a mother, but now you're wanting to grow a garden so that you can bring healthy food in for your family. And now you're wanting to be a homesteader, and you're wanting to learn how to milk goats, and you're wanting to learn how to do all these different things that are fearful. They can be a worry. They can be a stress. They can be something that is hard. And when we look at our child in the womb, we know that birth is going to be hard, but we're ready for it because we love that child inside of us. And we're ready to grow healthy food because we love our kids. We love our husband. We want to do those things for us. And that's what I think this verse is really talking about. God loved us first. And not only did he drive out the greatest fear in the world when he gave up his life for us, he taught us to do those same things. He taught us that there's going to be worry. Jesus worried when he was in the garden praying to God just before he went to the cross. He sweated blood because he was fearful. He was worried about what was going to happen to him. He knew it was going to happen. Just like when you're going to give life to your children, just like when you're going to go out and learn something new about growing food and doing things on your growing journey, or even drawing closer to the Lord. When we move away from the world, when we do things differently than the world, fear is definitely a part of that. And even Jesus himself felt that fear. But his love for us, and our love for our kids and our love for our family, they push us through those hard times. It pushes us through those hard jobs, those hard things that we choose to do for our families. Love is what pushes us over that little hump. Love is what tells us, yes, I understand that you have fear, but I think it's love that drives us to courage. It's love that drives us to going beyond ourselves, going beyond what we would even think that we could do. And when we bring God along with that, when we see what he did for us, we can see that everything he asks us to do is going to be hard, but he's going to be there with us. And his love, because he's the one who loved first, he's the one who's taught us to love. His love, that perfect love, is going to drive out fear. It's going to give us that courage. Love is going to give us the courage to do those hard things for our family and to do those hard things on our growing journey. If that growing journey is, no matter what it is, if it's growing a healthy family, if it's growing a garden, growing a homestead, growing closer to God, all of those things start with, when we choose to start it, we acknowledge that we're going to be fearful, but we do it anyways because we love our family. We go that extra step because of the love God gave us. And so I just want to remind you that when you're on your growing journey this week, you feel fear. Just remember that there is no fear in love, and perfect love drives out fear. Bringing God to you is going to drive fear out of your life. So just remember, there's no love in fear, but perfect love drives out fear. 1 John 4:18. So let's get back to the permaculture orchard and what it could do for our homestead. Which one should we use? Which one should we do? Should we do a tree guild? Should we do a permaculture orchard? Should we do a traditional orchard? And I'm sure my answer is going to surprise you. But first, let's do a real quick recap. So a traditional orchard is trees that are very close together. They're usually a monoculture. Permaculture orchard is going to be something that is multi-layered. Just like a forest in nature, God's nature. It's going to have vines, it's going to have a herb layer, it's going to have a sub-canopy, it's going to have all of these different layers. And a tree guild is refining that idea, but it's all for the benefit of the tree. Like I like to say that a permaculture orchard is a food forest. So those are the three differences. Those are the three definitions that we are defining here in this episode. So what, like I said, what do you think the perfect solution would be for your homestead? And the answer is, you're probably going to be very surprised, the answer is, I think it could be a combination of all three. I think you could find different ways to bring ideas, because that's what permaculture is to take different ideas and apply them not only to the situation, but also to your own property. And one thing that we do here at Red Ridge Farm is we don't just grow fruit. We don't just grow a garden. We have a homestead, and homesteads include animals. So I want you to picture this idea that I have been thinking about that I would love to do here at Red Ridge Farm. If we took that idea of adapting either a permaculture orchard, a traditional orchard, or even a fruit guild into our property, one idea that we could do, and this would be a kind of a combination of all three, and something that I would really love to do. We take pieces of every piece. We take pieces and put them together to make them fit. And a very visual thing that I see is somehow that we can have an orchard, but also bring in animals too. So here's just a little idea of what you could do. So one of the main problems with our traditional orchard is it being a monoculture and had the heavy equipment. What if you could lessen the amount of trees and space them a little further apart so the ground between the trees would get light? This is even different than a permaculture orchard. Then you could plant under the trees, not just grass, but maybe a nitrogen fixing plant like alfalfa or field peas. This is kind of like that meadow idea maybe. And this could improve the soil and bring in pollinators. Also, what if you could take it another step and run your herbivores, your animals, through the trees in the spring, like lambs or small goats? Now, this is going to be, they make sure if you protect your trees, because you know what a goat can do to a tree. And then maybe you could follow those goats or those lambs or those calves or those cows. After they have trimmed the grass, maybe you can raise a few batches of meat chickens. Wouldn't this also improve the soil and step away from that whole monoculture ecosystem? Animals are a part of and can be used to improve an ecosystem. That's why I think really you do have to decide how you want to do things. You can take these ideas from the traditional orchard, from the permaculture orchard, from the tree guild, and bring them together. And this is just my idea. So then maybe what you did after following up with the chickens is you planted something like pumpkins for the summer. You could have started the pumpkins very early in your greenhouse or in your home, and then when the meat chickens are done by mid-May, mid-June, you could have your pumpkins in the ground. And then once the apples were ready to pick, you could do this, of course, without machinery. Yes, it would take more time, but with the added production of the lambs and the meat chickens to sell, you were not just going to be dependent on one crop. You're not going to be just dependent on your apple crop. You're not going to be just dependent on what the trees can provide, because this area is going to be able to raise more crops. And if you are doing things like having the meat chickens and the animals, they are going to fertilize your trees for pennies. And say once your crop of apples were harvested and the pumpkins were slightly trampled, could you not finish your pigs on the discarded apples and pumpkin vines and pumpkins? As an old timer used to say, there's nothing like a pumpkin finished pork, and I've done that past couple years, and there's nothing like it. So as for a permaculture orchard, it doesn't all have to just follow one or the other. You could easily do your rosa trees just a little bit more apart. You could still do different plants underneath the tree that could be beneficial for the tree, like a tree guild. You could do more plants underneath the trees that would be more beneficial for you and make more of these lanes of pasture or meadow that your herbivores could use and utilize. You could easily do this on a very big scale. Let's take it a little bit further. So that could be an idea for a big area. And I do have that idea for certain areas of my yard and my pasture. But what about taking that other aspect of permaculture, that the edge of something grows more. The edge of a forest usually has more different plants. It has more varieties. And the edge of a garden is going to do the same. That garden, all the work that you do for the garden, all the extra water that it gets, all of those extra compost that you're going to put on it, they're going to eventually make their way to the edge. And what is the most natural edge that we have on a homestead? It's our fences. Having a fence between your pasture and your yard creates that edge. It's a very defined edge. So another idea, and something that usually goes along fences, is hedges. So why could you not put that idea together and make a fedge? Yes, a food producing hedge. And you could do the same thing like a permaculture orchard style, but all of it would go along your fence lines. In fact, we are slowly establishing a fedge here on Red Ridge Farm. Having that edge is just a natural place in nature that grows more. So like an example in nature would be the forest and the meadow, or the edge of a stream, the edge of a lake. All of those different edges are going to grow a more diverse variety of things. The edge of the forest is going to get a little bit more sun, and so it's going to have some benefits of the meadow. The benefits of the meadow are going to be when the sun is in the correct direction, the edge of the meadow is going to get a little bit more shade. So all of those ideas could be easily brought together in what I affectionately call a fedge. So you can see that you can really take those ideas, and that's the essence of permaculture. It's not to follow a certain person. It's not to follow exactly what I do. It's not to follow people. It's to follow nature and to take those ideas and make them work for you. Because as I tell you, the same way with building your soil, you have to be that expert of your soil, and you also have to be that expert of your own homestead. You have to decide what's going to work in your area. Those are just a few ideas for you of how you could take those three different ideas and bring them together, and even take them a step further and include some herbivores on your homestead. Just take it as far as you can go. I truly think that there is so much that you can do on your own homestead, but these are just some ideas to help you out. So let's just recap really quick. A traditional orchard is going to be a monoculture, going to need more maintenance, but you can easily take those ideas of a orchard and put them into a permaculture orchard by just adding different varieties, by adding different layers, and thinking of more of the idea of a food forest. Having those different layers that a forest has, but having them come together and be more of a food for you and also food for nature, but bringing that idea of the forest into your orchard. And then there's the idea of the fruit tree guild, and that's where you are trying to maybe concentrate on one type of tree or one tree and spread them out across your property, but the plants underneath are there to benefit the tree. And as to the question of what is right for you, what should you put on your homestead, the answer is there's an endless choice, but always think about the idea of permaculture. Think of how that is an integral system that copies God's design, and how you can take that design and implement it on your area, and that only you can find out what that perfect solution will be, because it's your property. There's going to be, maybe you don't like apples, maybe you only want to grow plums, maybe like me, I can't grow peaches. I just can't. I'm in the wrong zone. So you have to take the ideas and bring them into yourself, and you have to bring them to your homestead. And maybe, like myself, you want to do it a little more spread out, so you can incorporate your baby lambs, and you can incorporate meat chickens, and you can incorporate raising pigs. All of these things can come together and be just right for your homestead, because whatever you choose to do for your homestead is going to be just right for your homestead. It's because you are going to be in that moment. You're going to be there. You cannot compare yourself to what I do. You cannot compare yourself to what an expert does. All you can do is take those ideas and make them your own. So I want to thank you for joining me here at the Pray Just Plant podcast. And if this is your first time, I want to thank you truly for listening, and welcome to the community. Welcome to the Red Ridge Farm community of fellow growers. And as always, don't let the world hold you back. Pray, just plant.